Senator Ludlam.
Thanks, Madam Acting Deputy President. Well, it was worth sitting through that just to get to that last bit, I guess, Senator Fifield, because that really exposes— you started with confusion, which I will try and assist you with through you, Madam Acting Deputy President, and you concluded with ignorance, which I'm afraid I can't help you with much at all. We'll start with the confusion, however, because it is a fair question that Labor senators have looked to us, Senator Bishop did, coalition senators have as well, that you passed this tax in indication to the crossbenchers. If you passed it, how can you now come back and want to review it? So I will help with that confusion. Our options in this place as the crossbenchers when a bill is brought forward by either of the major parties are twofold, and we need to choose in this place does not always tolerate ambiguity. When it comes to a vote, you need to pick one side of the chamber to sit on or the other. And our options in the instance of the MRRT were twofold. The ALP, the government, on the one hand, a major party that for a brief period of time chose an evidence-based approach, set a task before the Treasury Secretary, and then adopted it more or less as proposed after a long process of review and design, that the extraordinary profits being raked off by the resource sector should be, without damage, without any kind of structural damage either to the economy at large or to those individual companies, once the profits got to a certain level, could be redirected and redeployed to the public good through a super profits tax. And this would not be the first jurisdiction in the world, you'd be aware, where this has been tried. Now, following that initiative by former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, a $22 million public relations onslaught that I think unbalanced the government and caught them somewhat by surprise. You'll be aware, because of some of the rhetoric that we heard a moment ago from Senator Fifield, the Greens are used to the kind of invective being directed at us by people like Senator Fifield, who effectively just read in a bunch of press statements from the Minerals Council, and not particularly original work. You do appear to have stolen Mitch Hook's homework there, Senator Fifield, because there wasn't an original word spoken. However, you'll get your chance, Senator Mason. You will get your opportunity. I don't think the government, in all honesty, was actually prepared for it. A brutal and dishonest campaign by the mining industry. They passed the hat around, collected $22 million and did you over. And it was an ugly thing to watch. I can recall the television ads that ran, and it evidently destabilised the ALP to the degree that it cost Kevin Rudd the Prime Ministership of the country. And we've not seen that kind of thing in modern political history before. A good government that had lost its way, I think, to paraphrase you there, Senator Williams. That was the comment. That's correct. In the aftermath of a really vicious and personal advertising campaign that effectively repeated most of the themes that we just heard from Senator Fifield, from whom he pinches his homework. So that is what we face on one side. That is part of our choices, that internal destabilisation that then cost a Prime Minister his job. What happened then, it appears, is that we gave the Prime Minister and the Treasurer delegating Resources and Energy Minister Martin Ferguson, the inside man, to hand a pen to the mining sector with which to write their own tax law. And what do you know? What came out of that process was something that was highly permissive and effectively geared towards a form of legal— I'll get to that, Senator Fifield. I promise I will allay your confusion. I can see you're struggling with it. I will get there.
Senators, through the chair.
Through you, Madam Acting Deputy President. So here is where I can help resolve Senator Fifield's confusion. Because our choice to sit on the other side of the chamber when a bill such as that is put to the vote, notwithstanding the amendments that we did move, which I'll get to in a moment, is an Abbott opposition, a political party that doesn't have the courage to take on the mining industry at all. We have a choice between a flawed tax, which we can try and amend through the process available to us, or no tax at all. Senator Fifield, I must have allayed your confusion because you're on your way. It's also clear now. Total capitulation, a policy that has rolled over on its back and is waving its legs in the air, which somehow Mr Tony Abbott, the Leader of the Opposition, has the political gift to turn into a show of strength, that complete and utter capitulation to the mining industry, is somehow been able to be portrayed as tough and fearless leadership and sticking up for ordinary people. There is real political genius at work there. It's fundamentally dishonest and nasty, but it's very, very clever. And so these are the choices that we face on the crossbench: a flawed tax or none at all. And I can remember very well, because I participated in the debate, the amendments that the Greens moved, both at the second reading and at the committee stage, that were shot down, what do you know, by the combined numbers of the government and the opposition. And that then leaves us with a stark choice at the end of the debate to vote for a tax that we know is flawed, or to vote for no tax at all. So when Senator Fifield reminds us that the tax picked up no more than $126 million in gross revenue in the first 2 quarters of its operation, that is $126 million better than nothing, because that's the opposition's counter-proposal. The amendments that we put at the time that were voted down by the major parties on the basis that the Labor Party figured that was the best they were going to get, and the opposition will vote against anything that appears to try to redeploy some of these extraordinary profits back into the public good. We can try again, for example, with the bill that we've brought to the chamber tonight, or we can try again through future inquiries, such as the one that Senator Milne, with the concurrence of Senator Cormann, has just initiated. Senator Cormann's motives are very clear. He hasn't tried to hide them. He wants to destroy the tax. He wants to pull it completely to pieces. At least that's transparent. Our motives are we will use the mechanisms available to us in this chamber, as is one of our primary roles, to improve the legislation and then to bring amendments forward to fix it. That's the purpose of this inquiry, and I'm very glad that it's occurring. So there are opportunities to fix the mistakes that are made, and I will remind senators that the mistakes have been out in the open for all to see. It was a pretty blunt instrument that Minister Ferguson enabled the mining industries, that he effectively handed to the big three, and we had people with very, very detailed inside knowledge of the mining industry, people like AMEC, who represent the juniors and the mid-tiers in Western Australia, telling us, we're going to get done over in this process. You've given this to the big three to handle in their own interests, and here's what's going to happen. And they spelt it out in detail that even Treasury officials were unable to validate. They said, we're going to need to wait and see the figures, for example, on the way that the depreciation provisions are written into the bill. Treasury wouldn't touch it at the time. They said, well, we're going to need to see industry's numbers. AMEC, on the afternoon of the inquiry that Senator Brown and I attended, Senator Bob Brown and I attended, spelt out for us exactly what was going to happen. Now, Professor Henry Ergus, who's not somebody that I tend to quote at great length in this chamber, but who does appear from time to time and offer the benefit of his views on these sorts of matters, opposed to the super profits tax, I should say, and opposed to the MRRT, but nonetheless well aware, because he spelt out for the committee, and it was actually quite an enlightening session, how these things would be gamed. If he has quite a detailed knowledge of the way that our tax law works and the way that that the targets of taxation can try and wriggle around and sleaze their way out of paying the tax. And what he said was, when you impose, so this was at the session that I think it must have been the Senate Economics Legislation Committee, 21st of Feb 2012, he said this: when you impose a significant tax, you're always going to provide incentive for people to minimise the tax that they pay. It's not necessarily illegal, it's just what happens. One of the ways in which they are going to do that is to try and shift income out of the taxed pool into the untaxed pool. To that extent, yes, this tax does invite that. And I just put to him a question, well, does the complexity of the tax and the fact that the miners themselves got to write it open it up to being abused? And he agreed essentially in principle. I asked him then, what are the vulnerabilities? And as a professor of economics, he was reasonably well placed to answer the question. If he was going to game it, and if he was going to try and write his way out of having to pay any tax under this thing, if he was working for the companies who got to draft the bill, how would he do that? How would he shift resources or income, as he puts it, out of the tax pool into the untaxed pool? Here's what he told us. In all fairness, he said, I've not devoted all that much time to that. But I think the issues that will arise, even under the tax as it is currently proposed, will include timing issues, revenue recognition issues, and particularly cost allocation issues, what the allowed rate of return on the downstream assets should be, how that allowed rate of return should be allocated, what the relevant asset base downstream is, and at what pace those downstream assets should be depreciated. All of those issues will doubtless arise in respect of this tax. So there you go, colleagues. Very happy to agree on this occasion with Professor Henry Ergus, who forecast exactly what it was that the miners were going to do with a tax law that they were allowed to draft by Resources and Energy Minister Martin Ferguson, on behalf of the Australian government, desperate and bruised at that time by the assault of the mining industry on television and in the newspaper, both paid and unpaid coverage of their advocacy. And it looked as though the new Prime Minister Gillard just wanted the pain threshold turned down, just wanted the temperature turned down and the assault to stop. And they gave the mining companies the pen. It is not our role to be an apologist for those who did the deal or for those who oppose any deal being done at all on the other side of the chamber. It is our job to recognise the mistakes that have been made and to correct them in the public interest. And as Senator Milne said a short time ago, to not come in here saying we need to rip money off single parents, we need to delay the introduction of a disability insurance scheme, we can't afford the rollout of large-scale renewable energy in Australia, or provision of decent public transport, or looking after the environment, or all of the other of the many priorities that assail us across this country. We do have the means to raise the revenue. We know that we do. And the beauty of a profits tax on an industry that does provide a substantial resource base, certainly, or revenue base, certainly in my home state of Western Australia, is that the tax doesn't kick in until you're doing extraordinarily well. That is the purpose of it. It is not a royalty receipt based on the tonne that comes out of the ground. It only cuts in when you are doing very, very well. So all the hysterical, frothy hyperbole from the other side of the chamber about how it's designed to assassinate the goose that laid the golden egg are basically simply reading in statements from the big end of town, who are doing everything that they can within the law that they get to write themselves to avoid paying tax. It's a game that is probably as old as the concept of tax itself. And it's not good enough for us to stand in here and pretend that there's nothing we can do about it. As legislators, it's our job to do something about it. And in the Australian Greens, we take that job very seriously indeed.
Thank you, Senator. Senator